people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with the bantamweight title fight in Denmark between Dina Thorslund, the champion, the defending champion, and Mary Romero, the challenger, and the late replacement. When news broke that Serene Satine would be withdrawing from the fight due to a cut, and I found out that Mary was going to be standing in her place, I told you, I wasn't expecting any surprises. I had Dina beating Serene Satine, and I had Dina beating Mary that stood in her place. Late replacements sometimes have a bad habit of being banana skins for a fighter on the premise that that's not what the fighter may have been preparing for, training for, the base style, the stance. Everything is different now. Physical dimensions, what you were getting ready for. It's what sometimes makes these late replacements banana skins, but I told you that wouldn't be the situation here, that wouldn't be the case between Dina and Mary, because Dina was getting ready for a pressure fighter, and that's what Mary is. Are you sure? Serene Satine, who she was originally getting ready for, she's a mid-range to inside fighter, and so is Mary. Then why is she moving around so much? Because she was essentially out-pressured, outpaced by Dina Thorslund. Dina was able to beat her at her own game. There was simply too much coming in too fast, too often, the punches were too hard, and Mary was retreating. She broke character, essentially. It's not the first time I've seen that happen to a pressure fighter. That's not even the first time I've seen that happen to Mary. Ellie Scottney was backing her off when they fought. You ask yourself, well, how the hell is Mary Romero a pressure fighter if she can't apply any pressure? Normally she can, with other fighters, with other opponents, but not with Dina Thorslund. When you get that pressure fighter to break character and they're backing off instead of coming forward, that makes them both uncomfortable and ineffective, because that's not what they're good at. That's not their forte. Moving lateral, creating space. Dina Thorslund beat the shit out of Mary Romero for something like 8 rounds. Following her around from one end of the ring to the other, getting short punches in there, fast ones, faster than Mary could get out of the way of those punches. She couldn't hold her ground. Gets in with a right uppercut. In the 8th. Punch came in hot. Incapacitated Mary Romero, and you could see she didn't want to keep going. She didn't want to go on. Goes back to what I told you. Dina Thorsland is one of these fighters that essentially toggles between not one, but 2 base styles. Most of the time you see Dina, she's a boxer puncher, bouncing back and forth on her toes, in and out. But with some fighters, in some instances, Dina Thorsland can be a pressure fighter. Fight like a pressure fighter. For the opponents that want to get aggressive with Dina, she's the boxer puncher. If the opponent's not aggressive enough, she starts to apply pressure. Like she did with Yuli Hangluna 2 fights ago, like she did yesterday with Mary Romero. That if you're not going to take the fight to her, she'll take it to you. You want to pay attention to that. You want to pay attention to the aesthetic of this fight, because this could be how a Nina Hughes fight plays out. This could be how a Miyo Yoshida fight plays out. The only other 2 champions at this weight. They're mid-range fighters, like Mary Romero's a mid-range fighter. They like to fight in the pocket. Normally they do, but I sincerely doubt they would be able to dominate the pocket against Dina Thorslund, who is some years younger, noticeably faster. Punch for punch, I'd say she's stronger than both. More defensively sound than both. Lighter on her feet, so if things are getting hot and heavy in the pocket, she's got the mobility, the agility to get out of there, and get out of there safely. Get out, then get back in. Dina's a motherfucker. She's a bad motherfucker, is what she is. The right set of ingredients that allows her to toggle between 2 different base styles, 2 different sets of advantages. Because this fight with Mary Romero happened so early in the year, that leaves the rest of the year open for Dina Thorslund to have 1, maybe even 2 more fights. God willing, 2 unification matches. The other 2 champions are willing and aren't otherwise preoccupied. Dina Thorslund, in my opinion, has more than enough ability and boxing acumen to become this division's undisputed champion. She just needs the opportunity to do it. She needs to be able to get those champions in the ring. If she can, I very much like her chances against Miyo Yoshida and Nina Hughes. Congratulations to her for successfully defending her WBC, WBO, Ring Magazine, and Lineal titles. Over to Japan for what was the Alejandro Santiago versus Junto Nakatani fight, the bantamweight title fight.
Santiago the champion, Junto the challenger.
Junto, the 2-division champion, turned 3-division champion now after a stellar 6th-round knockout of Alejandro Santiago. Talk about what we saw.
Junto's a big boy.
Big boy for these weights and a bad man. A lot of height, a lot of length, a lot of power, and a lot of speed.
Great boxing acumen, ring savvy, and great physical dimensions for a bantamweight champion now.
My thoughts ahead of this fight, my prediction was as such.
What are your thoughts on this one?
He's young moving up, and he's got the frame to carry the weight evenly, so I think the power is going to carry. Unfortunately for Santiago, he's a smaller guy. He's small even for a bantamweight. And Junto is tall fighter, long fighter, big reach. So poor Santiago, he doesn't have a choice. He has to come forward because he can't win this fight on the outside. He has to come forward. And I like D-Styles feel, well, because he's going to come forward and because he's going to open up, he's going to get knocked out. He's going to get caught coming in because he doesn't have a choice but to try and come in. And Junto's very strong, very fast. You know, he's like another, I don't want to say he's Inoue, but, you know, he's strong and he's fast, and you don't fuck around with him. So I got Junto knocking him out, but, hey, credit to Santiago, because that's a hell of a defense, bro. Like,
ahead of the fight, Junto Nakatani went in by way of knockout on the predication that this is a very tall guy, very long guy with a lot of speed and a lot of power, whereas Alejandro Santiago, he's a shorter, stumpier fighter, stumpier bantamweight that has to try and close the distance before he can do anything.
He doesn't have the dimensions to box from the outside, thus his only chance is to get inside.
And therein lies a dilemma. Yeah, Junto Nakatani's tall and he's long, but he's not one of these tall, long guys whose feet are nailed to the floor. This guy can actually move. He can actually manage the distance.
Not all long and limber fighters are created equal. Some like to use their height and length to bear down on their opponents. Think Brandon Figueroa, Sebastian Fundora, David Benavidez. These are tall, long guys that like to bear down on their opponents and mow them down. Essentially giving up their height and reach when they do it because they're very close to their opponents.
Whereas Junto Nakatani, in spite of being long and limber like those guys are, he doesn't give up his height. He doesn't give up his length. He manages the distance at which the fight is being fought on his toes, behind straight punches.
And he's fast. He's strong.
But he's not just selling out. Due to his physical dimensions, looking to plow through guys, he can box.
Taking a half step back whenever Santiago was trying to come forward, trying to get close to him, he takes that half step back, sticks the jab out there, sets up the straight punches to consistently walk him into punches.
Do a lot of damage when he does it. In the 6th round, he knocked down Santiago 2 times, landed some hard shots, some really hard shots. So there were no surprises here. This is what I envisioned. What I expected. Junto Nakatani, now a 3-division champion.
WBC champion at bantamweight.
I give him very good odds to become this division's undisputed champion. I do. I think he has everything he needs and everything it takes to take out all the other champions at this weight.
I give him decent odds to do it.
I only wonder if he wants to. I only wonder if he wants to become this division's undisputed champion, or will his reign at this weight be short-lived?
No, Inoue is upstairs at super bantamweight. That's a bigger money fight than any fight he could have at 118.
One way to get the ball rolling for that fight is to square off against the guy who fought in the main event, reigning champion Takuma Inoue.
No, Inoue's brother.
Successfully defended his WBA bantamweight title against former IBF super flyweight champion of the Philippines, Jerwin Ancajas, who he unexpectedly stopped.
And I say unexpected because in spite of Takuma being a very good boxer, very well-rounded, he really isn't known for power. He went into this fight with a record of 18 wins with 1 loss and only 4 knockouts. Just 4 knockouts.
He recorded his 5th knockout in the 9th round of yesterday's fight. I noticed that while Takuma Inoue was mid-range, he was really out-hustling Jerwin Ancajas, outboxing him, boxing his socks off.
Slipping, rolling, bobbing, and weaving under his punches, changing levels and beating those feet, moving around. Jerwin couldn't corner him.
That mid-range, when he was mid-range, he was really having his way with Jerwin on Cajas, who looked a bit bigger, although noticeably slower. Mid-range.
Takuma was having it all his way.
But for some reason, periodically, he'd bang with Jerwin on Cajas mid-range to inside, even though he had all the mobility and agility to keep the fight mid-range.
Safe at distance.
Where it's harder for Jerwin on Cajas to land his punches. Periodically, Takuma would bang in the booth with this guy. From the outside looking in, one way to interpret it,
Fatigue, maybe?
I don't know, I thought the guy was getting tired, maybe giving his legs a break. Because he was doing a lot better boxing from mid-range than inside. He boxed this guy on the inside, and I don't know, maybe Takuma knew something that we didn't know, that mid-range to inside, Jerwin couldn't actually hurt him.
It all looks a certain way from the outside looking in when you're the spectator in what is this spectator sport, but Takuma's the one taking the shots. Takuma's the one feeling the punches, and maybe he felt Jerwin couldn't hurt him. So he's willing to sit in the pocket with this guy, bang in the booth, because he's confident he can get him out of there. And he did, in spite of not being known for knocking people out. With something like 3 right hands, 3 right uppercuts to Cajas' midsection that did him in.
What you have to appreciate about Takuma Inoue is that even though he's not big on firepower, he is big on other things. He's big on boxing. He's got good movement, good defense, good shot selection. He's just not big on power.
Wouldn't known that yesterday from that knockout. He folded up on Cajas like a beach chair.
A couple of well-placed right hands to Jerwin on Cajas' midsection. You know what they say about body shots. You don't really recover from those. They have a more lasting effect than the head punches do throughout the course of a fight.
Take the wind out of you and you don't get it back.
Me and my money, that was a career best performance from Takuma Inoue, which could, theoretically, set up a unification match between him and Gento Nakatani, to where if Gento wins, that might set up a Naoya Inoue fight.
I feel like that's what Gento wants. That's what he's shooting for. That's why he's shooting up these weight classes so fast.
Didn't spend a whole lot of time at 115 pounds. He just arrived at 118 in great fashion. That both he and Takuma, Naoya's brother, hold titles at the same weight, I think that should make Takuma a person of interest for young Gento. So, Top Rank show out of Japan was compelling, was entertaining, and leaves us with a lot to reflect upon when it comes to the future.
Congratulations to Gento Nakatani. Congratulations to Takuma Inoue.
Maybe we get a unification match between them later on this year. Attention now turns to the main event that took place yesterday in Florida, the main event of the Matchroom show, where Edgar Berlanga went from being the frozen one back to being the chosen one.
You'll remember that when he was on Top Rank and he was coming through, he was billed as a knockout merchant, a knockout puncher, for so many first-round knockouts and early knockouts he racked up on his way up.
But the last 3 years or so, ever since he was unexpectedly knocked down by Caceres
On the undercard of Wilder vs. Fury.
ever since then, he became hesitant, tentative, almost unsure of himself. Outside looking in, that's been my interpretation of it, that ever since that knockdown, he wasn't committing to his punches the same way that he used to for fear that he might get knocked down again. When you have a knockout puncher that's not really stepping into their shots all the way, not really driving their punches or committing to them, they can have power, but it means nothing if they don't use it, if they don't let their hands go. What you saw in the Caceres fight, or at least what you saw afterwards, in the Steve Rolls fight and the Romer Angulo fight.
Edgar was hesitant.
The knockout power that Top Rank spent so much time promoting and talking about, it seemed like it all but evaporated. The power was actually still there. Edgar just wasn't using it because he wasn't letting his hands go. He wasn't confident enough to let his hands go. And tack on that, he's been through 2 or 3 trainers since then.
Remember that he used to be with Andre Rosier, then they added Kei Karoma to his corner, then he ditched those 2 guys, got a new guy.
I think he ditched the new guy, and I think he's with an even newer guy. So he's a fighter who's unsure of himself, doesn't really want to commit to his shots, and he's caught between styles because he keeps toggling through different trainers.
That explains what we've been seeing from Edgar Berlanga the last 3 years.
All of those early knockouts that got him attention were a gift and a curse, because when you finish in a fight so quickly, you don't get the chance to work on other things. You don't really get the chance to develop when you take the guys out so early, and if that goes on long enough, you could hit a wall.
You're gonna get a reality check. And Edgar Berlanga got one several fights and several years ago with Caceres. He's been boxing hesitantly since then, but I will say the last 2 fights.
The Jason Quigley fight and yesterday's McCrory fight. Edgar actually did show improvement in those fights. And make no mistake, this is not a fighter that I have a very high opinion of.
But I'd be lying to you if I told you that he didn't show improvement his last 2 fights. Since pairing up with Matchroom.
You know, what I think Top Rank wanted from this fighter at the time that they wanted it was more than he could give them. You know, they want him to fight in certain fights, whereas he wants to make certain money. They tell him, well, if you want that money, you got to fight in these kinds of fights. And he wasn't ready for those kinds of fights.
What he needed was for things to slow down.
He needed more development. I feel like he's been allowed to get that development on the Matchroom side of things. You know, they put him in there with Jason Quigley, a guy that Demetrius Andrade knocked out in 1 or 2 rounds down there at middleweight. He fought Edgar at super middleweight. Edgar won a points decision.
Then how did he show improvement?
He showed improvement in terms of shot selection, what he was throwing, where he was throwing, and when he was throwing it. He showed improvement in the Jason Quigley fight. A very subtle improvement, but still an improvement, as there was and still is a lot to improve upon. The improvement in the Jason Quigley fight was shot selection.
The improvement in yesterday's fight was confidence, commitment.
Reaction time. The star of yesterday's show for Edgar Berlanga in terms of his arsenal were his counter left hooks and his body shots.
Power, too.
But power means nothing if you can't land, and you can't land if you don't throw. So the star of yesterday's show, at least for me, were Edgar Berlanga's hooks, mid-range to inside, and his body shots, mid-range to inside.
He let his hands go.
Where he seemed gun-shy in the Steve Rolls fight, gun-shy in the Romer and Gulo fight, he let his hands go yesterday. He let his hands go, and it was the best I've seen him in recent memory.
Throwing with conviction, throwing with confidence, and being effective while he does it, strong while he does it, hurting McCrory to the body, stunning him.
Stopping him in the 6th round, as stated. I don't have the highest opinion of Edgar Berlanga. I think there's more work needs doing. A lot more work, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that I haven't noticed an improvement in him in his last 2 fights. He is improving.
He called out Canelo.
Ahead of this weekend's fight, you saw Eddie Hearn floating the idea that if Edgar wins this weekend, he might try to put him in the ring with Canelo. After the fight, Eddie stated that this fight was a WBA eliminator that makes Edgar Canelo's WBA mandatory challenger.
Get the fuck out of here.
I don't want to see someone as experienced as Canelo Alvarez in there with someone as green as Edgar Berlanga. That's a mismatch. Yeah, Edgar's going to say that he wants the fight, and Eddie's going to say that he wants the fight, but do the fans want it?
And miss me with the bit about him being Canelo's mandatory, because David Benavidez is Canelo's mandatory. If we're going to talk about mandatories, then he should be fighting him.
In theory, he should be fighting him because he was already mandatory before this weekend's fight, whereas Edgar would have become his mandatory, what, yesterday?
I don't want to see Berlanga versus Canelo, but I could go for Berlanga versus Munguia.
That seems more sensical to me. That seems more sensible to me if it can be done. If it can't be done because Munguia is otherwise occupied, if he ends up fighting Canelo, then Berlanga should look to have 2 more developmental fights because he needs them.
You know, all these fucking fighters think they're ready for the big time.
You're not.
You're not ready for Canelo.
Maybe you call up Jose Benavidez, who just shared the ring with Jermall Charlo at super middleweight. Maybe you call that guy up. Maybe you do a fight with him.
Because you're not ready for Canelo.